yet. We welcome any feedback about this presentation, as well as your ideas about webinars we might offer in the future on subjects in the broad area of stewardship and generosity. So let's go ahead and get started. And I think the first order is a poll. Susanna?
And please check all that apply. You can pick more than one option. About 50% of the participants have voted. In about 5 seconds, we'll turn it off. Give it a couple. All right, I think it is time to share.
Okay, so it looks like about 2/3 of you have checks, about 1/2 of you have neither, and I'm sorry, about one, I'm saying this wrong. 2/3 of you have cash, about 1/2 have checks, and 1/3 have neither. So this really illustrates one of the reasons for this webinar. So we want to get started by addressing the question, why should my church encourage online giving? Well, 6 months ago, none of us would have imagined that we would be spending the spring of 2020 at home, under a stay-at-home order, not able to go to work, not able to go to the restaurant, not even able to gather together in worship physically. 6 months ago, unaware of this pandemic, we would have still encouraged you to offer online giving. Why? Well, the poll illustrates that fewer people are using cash or checks. Most people today make our purchases using debit cards, credit cards. Some of us can even use our phone and our watches to make purchases. We're paying our bills through auto pay or through the website of the creditor or some other electronic means, and we're making our charitable gifts through charities website, through Facebook, through text to give, and all of those different ways to give. So if we're not using cash and checks as often, it's likely that we don't have cash and checks with us. Many of us don't carry much cash or checks with us. Because of my job, I travel to a lot of the different churches around our conference. And I've noticed that the time of offering is similar around our churches. And it's not that much different from the way it is when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. There's a time of offering when the ushers are invited to come forward to receive the plates. Some special music is offered and the plates are passed through the aisles and up and down the pews. It looks much the same as it did when I was growing up. The only difference is that in the 50s and 60s and 70s, you would see those plates piled high with envelopes, with checks, and with cash. Now the plates don't look the same. And I think part of the reason is that we don't have cash and checks with us. It's not a good feeling when you're visiting a church and the time of offering comes and you have forgotten to get cash and you don't have your checkbook. Sometimes I might have remembered my checkbook, but in many of the cases, the church doesn't even have a pen that I can use to write a check. They just have those little golf pencils. And that's a reminder that we do have pens available. If you need pens for the pew racks in your congregation, we have them in a quantity. Just let us know and we'll be glad to send you pens. But these are valid reasons for considering encouraging online gifts. But consider how much more important it is given the current reality. Now more than ever. Now there's a phrase we've heard a lot over the past 2 months, that and in these uncertain times, unprecedented times. But the current reality is such that we are unable to physically gather together in worship. We're under stay-at-home orders. It's been amazing to witness the ways that churches and pastors have adapted to continuing to offer meaningful worship opportunities despite being able to physically gather in the building. At the same time, I think many of our churches are lagging in the ability to receive and encourage giving in these times. So if not before the pandemic, maybe now is the time to catch up with the technology to the ways people are making their purchases, paying their bills, and offering those same means for giving their tithes and offerings. Even as states are beginning to ease restrictions and people are anxious to get back to normal, we may be entering a new time and a new way of interacting where physically distancing becomes the norm, at least during certain periods. And yet we have to be able to continue to fund ministry. Our communities relied on us before the pandemic. Now those same ministry needs exist, and many more needs that are caused by the pandemic. We need to be able to be the church in all of those situations. So even in the midst of these compelling reasons for offering online giving, you may go back to your congregations or to your leadership and experience some pushback, some obstacles. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim now, who will walk through some of the potential obstacles to online giving.
Thank you. If e-giving is something that you have in place in your church or that you haven't started in your church, you may have encountered obstacles, or you may anticipate that you will. I want to take a look at those with you today and discuss some of the ways to overcome them. But first, let's ask a question. Why bother? Besides the obvious reason that it's important now, we aren't together, but why should we, who are responsible for the good stewardship of our churches and for leading disciples into generosity, why is this important for us to do? I have some statistics I'm going to share, and I thank Horizons, one of our stewardship partners, for these statistics. Studies show that e-givers, electronic givers, give 33% more than traditional givers. That's a startling statistic to me. The Network for Good says that nonprofit recurring donors, more than just churches, give 42% more if they have a recurring gift that happens automatically. And here are a couple that I find particularly interesting. 40% of e-givers attend Bible study compared to 35% of traditional givers, and 26% of e-givers attend Sunday school versus 18% of traditional givers. Now, the statistician in me wants to look at that data and say, well, of course, they're e-givers, they're more engaged in the church. But I think we're looking at it in the wrong direction. I think the study is designed to tell us that helping people to move to generosity increases their discipleship, and we see evidence of that in other ways within the church. So this is not, e-giving is not something that we should do just to improve the financial stability of our churches, but also because it's a tool to lead people deeper into discipleship. When you encourage generosity, you're bringing people more into the image of God. The path you are walking may be difficult and sometimes will be confusing, but it is worth it. And we are here to help. So what obstacles will you encounter? I want to know first what obstacles you have encountered, so we do have another poll for you to answer. What obstacles have you encountered, or do you anticipate encountering on this journey to electronic giving in your church? So Susanna will bring that poll up for us.
And please choose all that apply.
I can't vote, but I would probably vote for a lot of them that I found.
We're getting a good response. I'll leave it up a couple seconds longer. All right. I think it is time to share the poll. Here we go.
Let's see, which one won? Lack of understanding. I think that's really very prevalent in our churches, and we've never done it that way before. Ranks up there pretty high also. It's too expensive, and our congregation does not have internet or self-service. We'll talk about that. Those are some things that we will help you to overcome. So let's talk about the different obstacles to doing this. The first one is we've never done it that way before. If you are in ministry in a church, if you're a clergy or if you're lay, I bet you've heard that related to a whole lot of different things, not just electronic giving. But I want to remind us all that Christianity is a religion that is defined by transformation. We are in this to change ourselves, to change the world. We are in it to transform the world. And all through history, and even in our modern history, our churches have adapted to the change of society in order to continue to reach people. If you look around your church and the ministry you're doing, we use email, we use Facebook, we use websites and telephones. Who would have imagined we would have used YouTube and Facebook Live and all the other online services so well for online worship? This is just another way to adapt to current reality. And they're all items that one can point to say, we've never done it this way before. I want to encourage you to check out a book by Scott McKenzie called Generosity Rising. There's a model at the beginning of it that I think really applies. He talks about how to build, in the book, how to build a stewardship and generosity team. The truth is that one person can't change the mind of a whole congregation very easily, but one person can change the mind of another person. And then you have two people. And two people can help change the mind of an entire finance committee. And now you have a team. And now you have a team that can start a movement in your church. That's a model that's applicable for this, but for a lot of other things in the church. Work with your financial team and help convince them of the need for this, not just for the convenience of donors, but for the needs of the church. Get their buy-in, and then that team can help lead. The next one is, we have it on the website, but no one's ever used it, or no one uses it very often. No one will use it. No one will use it until you promote it. Having it is only the first step, and it's not enough. You have to intentionally promote the tool. And I think this is another place that your leadership team can lead. If you have their buy-in, then get them to start using it. Later in the webinar, we'll talk about ways to promote e-giving, and how to combat the idea of build it and they will come. Build it and they will come doesn't work very well for this or for much of anything else we're doing in church anymore. So having it on the website is just not enough. The next obstacle is it is too expensive. In a few minutes, we'll discuss some actual costs, but I want you to think about the following things. There are costs associated with accepting a check, costs and security issues. Jeff will talk about some of that and how that compares later, but it is a cost that we just don't really think about to accept checks and cash. There are fees associated with online giving, but they should be considered a cost of doing business. And more than that, they're an investment in the good stewardship ministry of the church. If you think about our worshiping at home right now, if you could motivate one person sitting on her couch to give you $100 through an app on the phone right then during worship that she might not have done otherwise, and the fee for that is $3, isn't it worth it? Isn't it a wise investment in the stewardship ministry of your church to offer it? Because remember that 33% statistic, e-givers give 33% more. And I think a lot of that is giving us so much more convenient and close to them. Think about this in the long term. Do your donors go on vacation? Or are they there, not there every Sunday? And do they make up their offering? Or do they continue to send in their tithe? Some of them do. Not all of them do. And if the gift were automatically recurring, they wouldn't have to worry about it when they're on vacation. Your summers might not be as lean, and you could continue to see those gifts come in even as people are not in church. They are generous when they're not there of spirit, but they need to be generous of funds as well, and that helps. There are ways to ask donors to cover the costs associated with online gifts. It's not the recommendation that we offer you, but it is a possibility, and we'll talk about ways to incorporate that as well. And there are online gift-giving vehicles that aren't as expensive as others, and we'll talk about those. But it all boils down to this. What is the cost of not offering online giving or electronic giving? Think about that one. And that's an answer to the it's too expensive. The next obstacle is why can't they just write a check? I have written checks all of my adult life, and I carry a checkbook with me. But the only checks I was writing before I became an e-giver are the ones to the church. And I'm not that young. My younger son, who is an adult living in the world, has a checking account that he manages, but he does not own a checkbook at all. He doesn't have checks. And that's becoming more and more of a reality that churches have to adapt to. Younger people don't want to use checks to make gifts or to pay bills, and older people would prefer not to. In these days of in-home worship, not allowing people to give electronically doesn't bring the opportunity to give close enough to them, and we have to solve that issue. Next obstacle is that our congregation isn't computer savvy. First of all, if your area of geography or your demographics mean that your congregation members don't have access to the internet, we'll talk about that, and we'll show you ways that you can do electronic giving that doesn't rely on the donor's internet to accomplish. But secondly, please don't make assumptions about your congregation that may not necessarily be true. My mother is 82. She keeps her bank statement online in Quicken and reconciles on the computer. She posts embarrassing pictures of me on Facebook all the time, and she joins our family on Zoom meetings, especially during these times. It's the way we get to see her. She's techno-savvy. It is no longer a valid assumption that older people don't use technology. Almost 60% of adults over the age of 65 use the internet. And more than 3/4 of adults over the age of 65 have a cell phone. More than 40% of seniors pay their bills online. And those statistics are probably a couple years old. I bet they're even higher now. So those were some of the obstacles we face. I want to talk next about some of the ways to give electronically. But first, I'd like to know how, if you have electronic giving in your church, what vehicle do you use to accomplish it? So that's our third poll, and it will be coming up soon. You can check all that apply. I think the idea that you can check all that apply brings us to the point that churches can have more than one way to do this, and that might create a good combination for you.
We still have lots of votes coming in. All right, it's slowing down a bit. I'll give you about 5 more seconds. All right, we'll share the results.
So half of the churches that are in this webinar do not have any kind of electronic giving. The most popular one is bill pay, and that's the first one we're going to talk about today. And then credit and debit cards, the next most popular one. Thank you for sharing. I was interested to see the results of that. So let's talk about types of electronic giving. There are different ways to institute electronic giving in your church. And as I said, there are many churches who use more than one type. During this webinar, I won't get too much into the technical details of it, but part of the email that you receive at the end of the week will include a resource that lists lots of different vendors and ways to give and costs associated with them. So you can have a start on comparing different options for your church. But we'll talk about them generally here so you have an understanding of what they are and what their advantages might be. The first one is bill pay. Bill pay is an option that the donor would establish at her bank. It's either free or very inexpensive for the donor. She schedules a check to be mailed to the church, or she schedules an e-check, an electronic check, to be deposited in the church's account. That check would arrive in your church's mail and the electronic payment in your bank account, depending on which one she had chosen. This is an option you can suggest to your congregation that only requires you, that makes it sound simple, might not be, that requires you to promote it and to train your staff on using it, but not to contact a vendor. Promoting it means more than just mentioning it, as we'll discover later. So the person who's monitoring your checking account and your financial staff would need to know that that gift may arrive and how to record it correctly. So training your staff is important so that your checking account continues to be reconciled and your donor is properly credited for the gift. The next one on the list is automated clearinghouse, or what is often referred to as ACH. If you've ever received a distribution from the foundation electronically, you probably received it via ACH, even if you weren't aware of it. ACH is a fully digital method of depositing or withdrawing money from an account. If the donor agrees, your church can automatically deduct the donor-specified amount from the donor's account on a recurring basis. ACH fees are generally very low. To begin this process, I recommend that you speak to your bank because they can help you to get it established. It does require a computer interface on your end and some forms that your donors would fill out to begin the process along with their banking information. Both bill pay and ACH are good suggestions for a church whose donors may not have internet access, because neither one require the donor to have internet access to make the gift or cellular service. So as long as your church does, then ACH is something you can have, and then bill pay, it's the bank that deals with electronically transferring the money. The next one on our list is using credit cards or debit cards and the vendors and how those work. You can work with an outside vendor to accept credit or debit card payments. The difference between the two, you're probably aware, is that a credit card works on a line of credit while a debit card deducts money from the donor's account. Debit cards have generally lower transaction fees than credit card transactions, but ACH withdrawals are even lower than that. That said, there are donors who want to use credit cards to make a gift, and if you think of the points they earn, they're thinking of maybe about that, but they prefer to use a credit card. So offering both is a good option, and ACH payments. In order to establish payments through debit and or credit cards, you, the church, needs to contact an outside vendor. We at the foundation use a company called Vanco, and you can see their name on the screen. Vanco has a partnership with the United Methodist Church, so they understand how churches work. We appreciate that. A vendor such as Vanco creates a web page that you link to from your website. Usually you would need a giving button to give. You press the button and you're taken to the web page at the vendor, and it's designed usually to look like your web page, so it's a seamless transition. The donors that can make a gift there using either ACH, debit, or credit cards, whichever ones you've selected that they can do. The funds are moved automatically by the vendor to the church account that you've specified, and they send you a report or a statement, the vendor does, about the gift with the donor's information. One of the advantages we at the foundation appreciate about this kind of service is that we never see credit card and debit card numbers. We don't handle them. They are not in our office, so we don't have to provide security for them. We have assured ourselves that our vendor does a good job doing that, but we don't have to do it on a day-to-day basis. And it's important to consider donors' information and to keep it safe. Another option, another vendor is PayPal. PayPal offers the advantage of being easy to set up. When donating through PayPal donations, it's called PayPal donations, members will be taken to a page on PayPal's website, which you cannot customize. It'll have the PayPal logo on it. It will have the name of your church. Members don't need to have a PayPal account to give. They can donate there as a guest by entering their credit and debit information. And then it continues on as the other vendor I discussed. You can also consider companies, just a couple of them are Subsplash and Tidely. The resource we're going to send you later this week will have some of those listed and the costs associated with them. To give you an idea of the differences between debit and credit card costs, for our vendor, a debit card transaction has a fee of, I have it here, 45 cents per transaction. For a debit or credit card, it's 2.75% of the transaction plus the 45 cents. So for a $100 gift, that would be $3.20. For an ACH processing rate, it's $1 plus 45 cents. So $1.45 for a $100 gift, just to give you an example of how those fees work. The next option is text to give. Text to give also requires an outside vendor, and it can be the same one that you use for debit and credit card gifts. Many of them offer text to give as well. The donor texts a dollar amount to a designated number that's unique to your church. The vendor receives the text and sends an automatic reply with a link. The donor clicks the link and sets up an account at that text to give vendor with the donor's ACH or credit and debit card information. After crediting the account with the vendor, after creating the account with the vendor, the donor makes a donation and can choose whether or not that gift will be recurring automatically. So a story. There's a church in the West Virginia Annual Conference that uses PayPal for credit and debit card gifts. They offer ACH withdrawals to donors using a simple form, and then they have text to give. When a cash donation is requested for their feeding ministry, there are many donors there who don't carry cash with them, as we've already talked, and they don't have a checkbook with them. So they pull out their phones and they text their gift. That church, if they didn't offer text to give and they didn't promote it, would not receive those gifts to feed people. So you can see the link between generosity and the ministry that we're doing. And with that church, the combination of them all working well for them. The next one is social media fundraising. If you're a Facebook user, you've probably seen this. I know I have, but other Facebook platforms do it as well. My experience with this is it's very useful for project-related fundraising. For example, your youth group's going on a mission trip and you're raising money for it. They might consider a Facebook fundraiser. So here's another story for you. You may recognize the picture on the screen. That's Reverend Monty Brown and his late wife, Jane. Monty has a fund in the foundation in memory of his wife. It's called the Prayer Hospitality Fund, and it talks about the links between prayer and hospitality. He uses Facebook every year to raise funds for that fund, money for the account there. And then he uses that fund. He has a competition where people write essays about, or projects, it could be an art project, about the links between prayer and hospitality. Does it through a church where he did serve. And then scholarships are awarded based on the competition. On our end, we are the charity that receives the gifts from Facebook, and we receive the donor's name and the donor's email address. Sometimes we know who that person is and we're able to match that up with a mailing address and can mail them a receipt. Sometimes we email them that receipt. So it's something to look at as you're considering Facebook. If you're going to receive enough information, I would think in a church where you know all your congregation, it'd be easy to match those up, but it's something to think about and consider. For us as a charity, we don't incur any fees with the giving that occurs through Facebook. The next one on our list are QR codes. QR codes have been around for a long time, and anyone who has access to the internet can create a free QR code. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen a QR code that if you were to scan that with an app on your phone, it would take you to the foundation's giving page. So that graphic, well, first of all, you would go to online and you would Google a QR code generator. It's a free service that you can find online. You put in the URL, the web address you want people to go to, press a button, and it creates a graphic like that for you, which you can then download. And then you put that graphic on your bulletin or in your mailed out newsletter. It is simply a picture that the donor who is going to download a free app on the phone, excuse me. The donor, once they scan that picture, they're taken to your giving page. It's simply a way to give the donor a way to access your giving page without having to type in a very long URL into their phone. Excuse me. The next one is a card reader for an iPad. That card reader can also be hooked to a telephone, iPhone as well. It's something to consider when we return to in-person worship and we're able to pass things down the pews. Imagine passing an iPad, there's a picture of one there, an iPad with a little box on it where you can scan your credit or debit card. You can also use that for when people buy brownies at the bake sale, or they buy clothing at the rummage sale, when you're bringing in funds. So it has some good options associated with it. There is a church in West Virginia that has that iPad with that little square swiping device on a wall in their narthex. So people are coming in and out of worship, and they can make their gift through the offering plate, or they can go to the station that has the swipe and swipe their gift with their credit card. That's another nice option, I think, to think about. And you'll need a vendor to do this as well. And your vendor that does debit and credit card gifts can probably offer this to you also. I know ours would if we wanted to have it. The last one we'll talk about is a giving kiosk. A giving kiosk is more complex. It's a little bit older type of system. It does accept electronic gifts in the church building. It's a physical station in your church that provides a digital portal for things such as your website, for your giving site, for event registration, lots of uses for it. The limitations on it is that when your church is closed, as it may be now, people cannot access the kiosk. It's inside the church. Also, only one person can give at a time. Unlike an app on their phone, they have to be at the station. Only one person can do it at a time unless you went to the expense to have more than one kiosk. And it is an expensive option. It is something to consider as well, but you will need a vendor to do that also. And it may be the same vendor that you're using for others. I've talked a lot today about recurring giving, and I want us to focus a little more on that today. So I'm going to turn it back to Jeff so he can talk to you about that.
Thank you, Kim. So let's talk about recurring giving, but before we jump into that, let's consider the many ways that Kim has told us about that we can offer our online gifts. And one of the tools we're going to send you later this week is a chart that compares the features of many of these different vendors and ways to give, the costs of them, the benefits of them. And so that should help you. And I want to mention again, too, that I do see that many of you are asking questions using the Q&A feature, and I'm glad you're doing that. We will leave time to get to as many of those questions as we can at the end. Let's talk about recurring giving. So you've decided that it's time to start offering electronic giving as one of the ways, or maybe even a preferred way, that your congregation can give. You've overcome the obstacles and you've decided on one or more of the platforms that you're going to use. The next thing you want to do is make sure that you're promoting recurring giving as a preferred method of giving. That's really one of the main benefits to offering online giving. That way, members of your congregation who travel frequently, maybe they spend the winters in the South or just go on frequent vacations, they can continue to make their gifts just as they always have. When there's a stay-at-home order or members choose to stay home for their own health concerns, they will like the option to be able to continue their giving online, just the way many people may like the option to continue worshiping online. Their appetite for online worship has been whetted, and although I think most of us are looking forward and anxious to get back to our worshiping together in community, there may be times that we just appreciate that option of being home churched. That's the way I like to refer to it. So you want to make sure that you're continuing ways that people can make these recurring gifts that they can set up one time, and the same amount at the same frequency will continue until the donor changes it. You'll appreciate it as a pastor or church leader because your ministry funding becomes more predictable. And donors will appreciate it because they can stay on track with their giving. They don't have to make a makeup check after they've missed a few weeks, and their giving continues whether they're physically present or not. So make sure to integrate your website and your social media and your print media with whatever online giving platform or platforms you've chosen, and give your donors the option to set up recurring gifts as at a particular timing and a particular amount. Be transparent about the cost of online giving, and most of these services will give donors the option to increase their gift to cover the costs. So the next thing you would need to do is to prepare the church leadership and the staff. As Kim has mentioned a couple of times, it's not going to work if you don't have the buy-in of your staff and key leaders toward online giving. Related to one of the obstacles is the cost of online giving. So yes, as we've said, there is a cost to this service. And while it's easy for us maybe to focus on the direct cost and perhaps even see that as a barrier, when we do that, we forget to make a comparison to the actual costs associated with receiving paper checks and cash. Think of the paper and the postage and the time it takes to manually enter gifts, the cost of return checks, and the staff and volunteer time that can be saved by using an online giving service. But perhaps the most important question is the lost opportunity by not offering online giving. What's the cost in gifts not received by not offering some digital service? So let me encourage you not to focus on the fear of increased costs, to let that be your guide in making these decisions. Instead, I would suggest that you might anticipate the benefit of increased donations by offering online recurring giving. The staff will need to be trained on how to accept gifts and record them for proper tracking. It will be different from the way they've done things before. The vendor will provide a report with the information needed to track gifts, such as the name of the donor and the amount. Someone will need to regularly review that information. And so you'll need to work with your finance team, your financial secretary, church treasurer, to figure out the best procedure in your context to get the information you need and to ensure proper audit controls. And this conversation, as with any conversation around generosity and money, gives you the opportunity to take away the mystique from money and strengthen the idea that money is not a secret. It's one of the many gifts that people can offer to God. So let me turn back now to Kim to discuss promoting e-giving.
Thank you. So how do you promote online giving? There is a church in West Virginia. There's probably more than one, like the one I'm about to tell you about. But they already have e-giving established, but no one or very few people ever use it. When you speak to them, I speak about it at the finance committee, the financial secretary probably is going to say, why don't we get rid of that? Nobody uses it. I don't understand it, and I don't like it. And then the treasurer will say, I don't know why we need it. I would never give that way, and it's expensive. I think the problem is that the leadership were never brought into the idea. They don't have ownership over it, and the congregation has probably rarely heard about it. Now, I could be wrong on these assumptions, but that's been my experience. We've talked about some of the statistics surrounding e-giving and how it can be helpful, but none of that will be true if no one uses it. So promoting the tool is vitally important. So how do you do that? First of all, the leadership needs to make the decision that this is in the best interest of the church, and then the leadership needs to start using it, and the leadership needs to start talking about it. The pastor can do this by making her gift an electronic gift during worship when everybody's watching. So during the offering time, she might pull out her phone and saying, I'm making my gift electronically, and you can do this too. That's one way to promote it. Think about who your ministry leaders are, and they may not be the elected officers in your church. They may be, but you know who they are. They're the influencers in your church. Talk to those people. They give about 40% or more of your gifts to the church. So getting their buy-in is important, and get them involved. Help them to understand how this can be of benefit to the ministry of the church. So get your leadership involved. And then ask people to use it. Not just here's something you might want to try, or here's a convenience for you, but explain to them why this can be a benefit to the church. The people in your church love their church, and if they understand that something is going to be a benefit to the financial ministry, they might be willing to switch to using it. They may want to use it and haven't even thought about it much, but they know they pay their electric bill online and they pay their water bill online. This isn't a bill that they're paying. This is their generosity to God. They may be willing to switch that to online as well. Have a promotional plan that involves people, asking people to use it, and then ask them to do it for the betterment of the church and the financial ministry. Next, help people understand how to use it. It can be complicated. Most of them are pretty simple to use, but people can be a little frightened of technology. So help them understand how to use it. Ease of use is critical. Try out your giving platform and make sure it works and that it works easily for them. Ease of use is critical is another important axiom for pretty much all ministry in the church, I think. Make sure you provide very clear instructions. Give them to someone who's never tried it before and let them run through it and see if it works. During physical distancing, when you're doing the offering during your online worship, include instructions with your virtual bulletin if you use it, or on the screen with the website address, the URL, so people know where to go to do it, and invite them to do it right then. Record a video of how making a gift could be an easy thing to set up. And if there's someone in your church, an older person who you know would help you, include that person in the video as well, and then distribute that to your church. Those are a few ways you can ask people to do this. Do you want the donors to cover the transaction fees? We don't recommend that you do that, but that is something you can do. If that's an obstacle that you cannot overcome, you can ask your donors to cover the transaction fees. Speak to your vendor about that. That may be a little button that you could put on the giving page that they can click, cover the transaction fees as well. Which means if they're giving a gift of, I'm using $100 because I can do that math in my head quickly. If they're giving a gift of $100 with their debit card, their gift would then be $103.20. Remember that when you receive a gift, a $50 gift, for example, those fees are going to be deducted from that gift before it arrives in your checking account. So you'll see in your checking account, $48.25. But the paperwork you receive on the gift will show you it's a $50 gift. The donor needs to be credited with a $50 gift. That's how much they gave. And if they are covering the online costs associated with giving and their gift is $103 and you're using part of that to pay the fees, so your gift is $100, they need to be credited with the $103 of the gift that they made. So their receipt shows the actual gift they made, not the amount that was credited to your church. I hope that you will consider electronic giving as a tool for now while we're distancing, but also something for later when we're together. The hard work that you're doing now is not for something that's temporary. It's for a permanent addition to your finance ministry that will lead people closer to Christ and generosity. Jeff is going to talk about giving and worship and your time of offering, so I'll turn it back over to Jeff.
Thanks, Kim. So if we get everyone to give online, does this mean that we can skip that uncomfortable time of offering? No, of course not. Whether worshiping online or in the building, celebrate the time of offering. Offering is an important part of worship. So begin the time of offering with some kind of offering talk. The pastor or whoever bids the offering should remember the stories of transformation that inspire giving. How is your church at work in the world? How have lives been changed because of the ministries of your church? Think about those questions and have answers to those questions and tell those stories. as a part of the time of offering. During this time, tell people how they can give electronically and include links and QR codes on the screens and in the bulletins, whether they're print bulletins or e-bulletins. Remember that offering is an important part of worship and a chance for the congregation to respond to what God has done in their lives through Christ. Be creative about how to be inclusive in this offering time within your own context. It wouldn't be the same in every church setting. I visited a church in February, back in the pre-pandemic days, that is in one of the more urban areas of West Virginia. And because of the outreach that that church had done in the community, they had a significant number of new worshipers who they knew were not in a position to give financially. The pastor was especially sensitive to this, I noticed, in the way he bid the offering. He thanked everyone for the gift of their presence. And at the time on cue, I missed it because I was looking at something else. The whole congregation except me responded, "Here I am, Lord." A reminder that we present ourselves when we come to worship as an offering to God. I thought this was a wonderful way to be inclusive to those who can't give maybe financially. So make sure you design a way for e-givers to participate in the offering. There are many ways you can do this. I know at my church, I have a recurring gift set up, and during the time of offering, when I am in church, in my own church, it's a little awkward because I don't participate in the offering. I've already given, and there's no means for me to put anything in the plate or to do anything. So it's the same usher, Lee Oxley, that comes to my pew. And we have this little thing where he looks at me and gives me the stink eye, and I shrug my shoulders and say, "I gave online," and he nods as if to say, "Sure you did." It's just a thing we do. But it would be nice if I could participate in the offering, not only for my own peace of mind and my own offertory act during worship, but as a witness for others. Think about if you're in a church visiting, and maybe you're not someone who attends church regularly, and this time of offering comes along, and you see the plates being passed around, and all of the church leaders, including the pastor, they're not participating in the offering. What message does that send to you as a visitor? Does that make you want to give? So there are ways that you can include your e-givers, your recurring donors in this time of offering. You might have a laminated card that can be reused when we're out of this pandemic era and can touch things again. You can have this reusable card that just says, I gave online, or words to that effect. You can also have a card for everyone to use to check ways that they are going to give of their prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness in the coming week. Wouldn't that be a great way to get your worshipers to remember that the offering time is not just about our financial gifts. It's about financial gifts, but it's about much more than that. Offering is worship, and people are hungry to participate in it. As I mentioned, participating in the offering is also a witness. So make sure that the pastor and the church leaders are able to participate in some visible way. Because if they're participating, that's a witness. If they're not participating, maybe that's a witness you don't mean to convey. Well, this concludes our prepared remarks, but I did see that we had several questions. And so I want to turn to those now. We have about 7 minutes. The first question says, online giving involves online account administration by individual members of a church, whether they be volunteers or staff. Does the foundation have a policy or list of best practices to better enable the local church to provide oversight for administering online giving accounts? That's a great question. And while the foundation does not really have a policy about this, we were discussing this very issue today. And I think, Kim, if you wouldn't mind, you might have the answer to that.
Sure. We have been discussing this, and I've been doing some research about it. First of all, you need to remember that your finance committee and your finance chair has a responsibility of setting financial policies in your church and to make sure that they're followed. So that person needs to be involved in the policies you set. And you have these online portals. Make sure that you're giving access to people in your finance team who need to have it and that they have their individual logins to those portals. And if you have access to banking information, you need a policy to keep that information safe. If people are giving you their ACH information, which is their routing number and checking account number, you need a way to secure that. But what do you do when the online gift goes into your checking account? We're used to collecting the offering in a plate and counting, having two unrelated counters who count those funds and reconcile with each other and fill out a form. But how do you incorporate online giving into that? Well, this is the thought I have that we had for you today. Print the reports that you get from your vendor, or in some way have a record of them. They're going to tell you who the donor is and the amount of the gift. You need to have that information. You could provide that to your counters if you want your counters to incorporate that into the work that they're doing. And you probably have a reconciliation form you're using where you could, where you count the checks and the cash that you've received and the checks that have been mailed and they're deposited together. So that form reconciles what the counters did to what is actually taken to the bank. You could add another section to that or another form where you include the online gifts that were received in the checking account. They won't be in the deposit you make, but it has been deposited and you need to reconcile that. So then the financial secretary would probably receive those donor reports and enter those into reconcile that to the bank, the checking account or whatever account you're using, that knowing the amount of the gift and the amount that was put in the account, that those are reconciled together. And that's necessary so that your checking account reconciles. You're entering that gift into your accounting system, and so when you do your checking account reconciliation, that checking account matches in-house and at the bank that reconciles. Enter those online gifts in the donor management system so that you're sending receipts to people of the correct amount and they're getting credited for the gifts that they've given. And then as you do your annual audit as a church, include online gifts in the samples that you pull to make sure the policies that you've instituted are being followed. Those are the thoughts I have about it. You're right, though. You do need to have oversight as to what's happening with every part of finance, including this.
Thank you, Kim. We've had a couple of questions and also in the chat about whether we will send out these slides. Yes, these slides are going to be attached to an email that you'll get from us along with some other resources and a link to the recording. So yes, you'll be able to print these out. Here's a question. Are there any interfaces for e-giving that do not charge a percentage? Yes, there are. And I would suggest that perhaps in most cases you get what you pay for, so the service is not going to be as easy as one that and as flexible as one that you do pay for. And then the same individual has a follow-up question. Has the foundation considered performing an e-giving service to the churches? And maybe that would be less than the 2 to 3% that is kind of typical. No, we haven't considered that. I guess it's something we could consider, and we will consider. I don't know how easily doable that is, but that is something that we will discuss, and we'll let everyone who was on this call know if we decide that we can start providing that service. We have someone who mistakenly answered one of the poll questions wrong. That's okay. We're not going to hold anyone to that, so don't worry about that. A question: what is ACH? ACH stands for Automated Clearinghouse, and it's the way that funds are electronically transferred between banks, between my bank and your bank. Another question about the slides. Here's a question: can PayPal be set up to ask the donor to pay the transaction fee? The differing vendors, I believe PayPal and Vanco, those are the ones that I know the most about. But many other vendors will offer that as part of the interface between their website and your website. That question about fees and about whether the donor can pay the transaction fee would be included as a part of that. And that's one of the items that we can include on the chart that we'll be sending you. It appears that as I scroll through these questions, someone else on the same team is scrolling too.
Oh.
There's a question about our recommendation for the best method of electronic giving. I think it's going to, I really, we have a service that we use that makes the most sense for us. I think it's going to depend on the context. Is Wi-Fi readily available among your congregation? Do they use cell phones? Does the church have Wi-Fi? Those are all the kinds of contextual data that would be considered in what would be the best platform for your situation. So I think the resource that we send out will be helpful in this.
I want to also mention the idea of a website called Giving 365. It's offered by Horizons. There are resources there you can also access. And one of them I saw today was a chart you can use to take notes as you look at different vendors and make a comparison and see which one best meets your needs. That appeals to me as a person who likes organization, to have a chart lined out with the questions you would want to ask them. So that's maybe something you want to use to approach this question.
Someone asked if this is mostly for larger churches. I would say no, that any church could be set up for some kind of recurring online giving. That someone asks whether Venmo is a possibility. Yes, and that will be included on our chart. Does ACH or QR code offer reports which can be used to provide quarterly or yearly reports which can be provided to members who need reports? I'm going to say the easiest answer for that, for one thing, QR code is going to interface with whatever other platform you're using. But most of these services will provide something that can be easily, easy for me to say because I don't do it, but easily downloaded into an Excel spreadsheet or some kind of spreadsheet that could then be used for donor tracking, including the reports that can be sent to donors for their tax records and just for their giving records.
I would add to that, for instance, as a donor through Vanco, I can go on as an individual donor and download what I've given, but it's not a properly formatted receipt that says this gift was given. There's magic language. Jeff, what is that? No goods or services were exchanged for this gift.
Yeah.
That's something you as a church need to provide. there are some of these systems will interface with donor management systems. You can ask your vendor about that so that gifts automatically are entered in your system, but that's probably a very complicated thing to do. We don't do that here. I don't know if that helps with the question, but.
So it is 3 minutes past the hour, and we promised to keep it to 1 hour. I think we've gone through all of the questions, but if we didn't answer the question to your satisfaction, or if you have other follow-ups, our contact information is on the screen. Feel free to email us, call us, and we'll be glad to try to answer your question fully. And let us know if there's any other ways we can help you. As I mentioned, any area of generosity and stewardship, we can either help you with it or help you find resources that would be helpful to you. I love to talk mostly about planned giving, but whatever the need is, don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. Kim, do you have anything to add?
Just what you said. We're here to help.
We thank you again for your participation today. Please let us know how we can help you in the future. Bye.
Bye.